We are on Facebook Live and we're ready to go, which is fantastic. Hello, everyone. I'm Helen Bello. I'm the director of Welcome Home Toronto to a Body, Mind, Spirit connection. And Welcome Home promotes mindfulness, oneness, and community through meditation classes, workshops, and special events, such as this Conscious Cafe with Dr. Mitch Abrams. And we've done a number of Conscious Cafes together. And Dr. Mitch Abrams is a Canadian radiologist and musician who's had his own unique journey through Western medicine as a physician, a division chief, and an open heart surgical patient. And Dr. Mitch has cultivated a deeper understanding of medicine and life, and with humor, depth, and inspiration, and incredible art, he gives us a look into what's possible in terms of community organizations, healthcare on a very conscious level, and really dealing with what's happening in our world right here, right now, from a place of consciousness. And so Dr. Mitch Abrams is also the founder of Next Gen Health, Next Gen Solutions, which continues to grow organically and supports a number of schools and community organizations working with educational and art-based mindfulness programs. So great to have you back. We've got a few of these planned this month, which is fantastic. Yeah. And your theme sounds very timely for tonight.
Yes. Yeah. Given everything that's happening south of the border, I thought it would be an interesting and opportune time to discuss social inclusivity and social divide.
Yes. Wow. Yes. And it's not actually just south of the border. It's here. This is a global issue for sure. Yeah.
And it's definitely a mental health issue. You know, the idea that we are separate and, you know, the degree of anger and frustration towards one group versus another. This is really a mental health issue an epidemic that we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, because when I was giving a heart math workshop yesterday to a group of ministerial students, and I talked about how we are such a cortisol-driven society, and there is no way that you can reason with people in that high cortical state. And I gave the example of the riots. Like, you can't reason with people at that point. Mentally, they're not able to process information. They're not able to process their feelings. And so how do we get people to this place where there are courageous conversations and heartfelt conversations with compassion and the willingness to really hear what each side has to say and come to a resolution and an understanding, not just from the old beliefs, but creating something really new and from a place of wholeness.
I love that. Absolutely. And it's interesting, you know, how you describe the need for people to sit and really listen courageously without judgment to others to help them expand their own perspective. And what we do in these conscious cafes using art, that is one tool in research that we know is a very effective tool to help people step outside of their mental sandbox to understand and embody somebody else's perspective as we engage in conversations. So, I mean, I don't think art, you know, to create art programs right now to help deal with this acute crisis, but certainly when we talk about how do we move forward to start bringing groups of people together and having further conversations, I truly believe that the medical humanities, which includes the arts, will be a key and core strategy to help people expand perspective and start that process of re-engaging each other.
Yes, I've never heard that term before, medical humanities.
The medical humanities, yes. Well, you know what? It's been around for centuries. Even when I was going to medical school, the medical humanities was available, but it was an aside. You had an option of opting in, participating in a medical choir, and that was essentially the extent. And that was, 15, 20 years ago. And over the last, 2 decades, the amount of research around music, art, and even storytelling in the context of medicine in order to educate and to heal has really, become, something that we've identified as a very effective and powerful tool. And now we're starting to see in communities and in hospitals, more and more of the arts is being incorporated, thankfully.
Thankfully, yes.
Yes.
Because I didn't know that existed. Except for the beautiful art I see placed in the hospital, but I don't see a lot of interaction with art.
Yeah, that's the next phase. That'll be the next phase of evolution and health.
That's fantastic.
So, excuse me. So I thought I would show you this radical piece of art that created for you and for the audience. Let's see if this will work. Typically takes a few seconds to load. Here we go. Okay, does that come onto your screen?
It does, loud and clear and very upfront.
Yes.
A very timely picture. Wow. I need a moment to take all this in because
please do. Please do.
Okay, while I'm taking it in, how do you come up with this? What's your process?
You know what? I love music, and I always find after spending some time playing music, I find myself in a very expansive space. And for me, I love to write, and those are the times my best time of reflecting, contemplating, and writing comes about. So for me, it's a lot of creativity and just having that space to explore.
That is fantastic. Okay. Well, I'm going to go to the first and most obvious thing for me, because I actually did talk about this in the Heart Math workshop as well, around our DNA. 99.8% the same. It doesn't matter what race or color we are. We all come from that same place. We're all made from that same place, and yet we all are unique, individualized expressions of the one. That one, what I call infinite, creative, intelligent source of all life. So I love that you put that in there. And we did have a really good conversation yesterday about our oneness and our DNA. So that's what I pick up on first of all. And then I like how it's I see the card as maybe the division between two different consciousness, two different ideals, two different races, two different states of mind. But in the very core, again, we're all energy. We all have that same source of energy, and how we have that field of energy that's all around us. And we can, and I think what's showing is the handshake underneath. It's like cradling the energy, and that when we come together and we cradle that energy, it can expand and withstand, rise above, transcend, transmute the divisiveness.
Mm, I love that. That's beautiful.
And
Mm,
I believe so possible, right? It
absolutely.
there's so my husband came home on, he said to me on Sunday morning, I think it was, he saw a teenager wearing a Martin Luther King t-shirt that said, "Don't give up on the dream." And he said, "How come 40 years later we're still dealing with the same stuff?" And I said, "Consciousness."
Mm,
Because we've made strides, but at the very core of each and every person, we have not shifted in consciousness enough to eradicate that belief that somehow we're different, or there's a superiority, inferiority, the haves, the have-nots, the righteousness around it, the resentment that builds up. We haven't shifted that in our consciousness.
mm,
And in the very core there, where you have the coherent field of energy radiating out from that person, that's consciousness. And that consciousness, that will heal any divide.
mm.
But
I
it's up
agree.
to us, right? Each one of us. We all have to do our own work, as well as then take the right and perfect action for each of us for something,
Mm,
versus being against and divided.
hmm. Absolutely. I love that.
And then is that a bunny rabbit behind there in the
Uh,
background?
it's not a bunny rabbit, but you know what? How we perceive things. I mean, it certainly could be. Um, but are you looking at this? I mean, at this rounded structure, almost like in the middle of the image.
Yeah, behind the
Mhm.
hands.
That is actually the globe. That's kind of a superimposed picture of the Earth. Probably not so
Oh,
well.
okay. So my ink blot impression is a bunny rabbit.
Yeah.
That's very funny.
Okay.
Yeah, because I do. I get the globe now, but it's uh yeah, that's very funny. I
Yeah.
really do see this like soft bunny rabbit staring out at me.
Well, that's the beauty of art. The beauty of art is that it can be anything and everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to
Mm.
know from you, Mitch, when you were putting this together, what were you feeling?
Well, you've touched on so much of it, Helen. The idea that we're in the midst of watching our social fabric being ripped apart.
Hmm.
And this idea, in the image, this kind of what looks like perhaps even a piece of paper being ripped apart by these two hands. And the irony of it is that that we focus on the differences between ourselves, but yet, as you rightly mentioned, 99.8% of our DNA amongst everybody is identical. And we're identical beings from a certain perspective, and particularly from a perspective of energy. And hence that image in the middle with the image of the human with the field of energy around it really represents the fact that we are all energetic beings. And the idea that we're separate from each other, and that we're different is really uh, a perspective. And really, it's um, part of our imagination, because the reality is we are so inherently connected. And we're connected, as we talked about in the previous programs, we're connected not only through our DNA, but through our energy systems, the waves of energy coming from our heart and how it connects with other people. We're designed to function as a united social ecosystem. And that's our human biology and our physiology. And, when I was first putting this together, the initial thought was, that this was, our social fabric being ripped apart. And as I pondered on, as I was going along and creating this, then I started to think about, well, perhaps we could flip the picture and flip the narrative to say that, well, we're at a point of, such a social dividedness. How do we bring ourselves back together? How can we stitch the social fabric back together? And, it's a matter, in my opinion, it is a moment when our consciousness, our individual consciousness, can become aware of energy and our interconnectedness from this new perspective, a perspective that's perhaps outside of, the sandbox that we each kind of live in, and take a step outside of that box, perhaps at a greater level, like to Mother Earth or to the planet's perspective. And we start to realize how connected we actually are. And by embracing this idea of energy and embracing these understanding of our social cohesiveness, the capacity that we have to unite, I believe kind of sets forth a new path towards peace. And I truly believe that we each need to expand our consciousness and to become aware of this new perspective. But at the same time, we are born into this monopoly game. We were born into this sandbox, a socioeconomic sandbox that really is designed to divide and conquer. And so part of the problem is that despite, being educated and becoming more and more aware, becoming more socially conscious, we're still in the grips of a system that's constantly dividing us and constantly putting scarcity, fear, frustration, injecting it into our lives, just by the nature of, capitalism and the nature of this socioeconomic model that we were all born into. We had no say. And I almost feel now that because our understanding has evolved to a point where we can now realize that the way that we created a system at a time we thought we understood ourselves was completely wrong. It's almost like, having a shoe and we've outgrown that shoe. The shoe doesn't fit anymore. It doesn't fit our society. It doesn't serve us as a community locally and globally. Mm-hmm. And so now it's a matter of, how do we understand ourselves? How can we tune the masses into a certain frequency of thinking of this interconnectedness? And at the same time, how can we use energy to perhaps free ourselves from an outdated model of community engagement? Mm-hmm. And many people, believe that there is no other way other than the way that we've been doing things in our current time. But yet, we also realize that our system is constantly evolving and constantly changing. Nothing remains the same. And I'm a true believer that, everything that we're experiencing now is really the first step into a greater journey of breaking free of a model that just doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve the individual. It doesn't serve our communities. And if anything, it's contributing to our mental health epidemic. It's contributing to our, increasing suicide rates. And it ultimately was the result. It causes this COVID virus because we exploit one nation over another nation. And, this is exactly what happens as a reaction, as a result of, disparity and divisiveness. So to me, this is kind of like, it can be seen as, here we are ripping the social fabric apart, but at the same time, it's like all the clues to help us understand how we can stitch the social fabric back together.
I love what you said about the structure of capitalism and how it's designed to keep us separate. And and I have no judgment whether capitalism is good or bad or right or wrong. It's not about the concept itself. It's always the consciousness in which it is used with. And so, and I was very surprised to learn that in the marijuana industry, which is huge, it's like a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it is designed for white people and to keep the black people out from making money from it. And I was shocked when I started discovering this, and just how, again, it's another example of a race that feels it has the right to take at the expense of others and to not be inclusive. And for me, it's, why can't everyone benefit? Why couldn't it be designed so that it, we have this huge change? And I mean, it's not, again, I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm just saying there was a huge shift in legalizing marijuana and the opportunities for making money on something that's been around for a long time. But to really understand how the structure got set up for the white person to make money and leave out the blacks. And I went, see, we haven't changed.
Yeah.
We had a huge opportunity there. And that's just one small thing. So can you imagine, what in terms of giving to communities, education, healthcare? Again, it's another separation. And I went, oh man, we just keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And it is from that, it's from greed, but greed is driven by fear, right?
Yeah.
There's not enough for everybody. And I better hang on or accumulate as much as I can. And it's like, you have no faith. When people are in that place, there is no faith. There's no sense of givingness. And it's like, okay, well, we just create, it's just another tear in the fabric.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like how you described it as, saying that, again, neither right or wrong, but capitalism in the construct of the consciousness that we're in. And, the system, it rewards, unfortunately, not only does it reward, but I also think it supports and it creates more greed, more, wanting of power. And it's almost like these are elements of the, parts of our brain that are lower on the evolutionary scale compared to, a more consciously evolved brain or a more consciously evolved neural network. And the construct, it's almost like it's like a feedback loop. The more that somebody is successful, it creates more division, and then this idea of people wanting more power, more finance, more hoarding, the fear of scarcity versus the has and the have-nots, and it's such a degree of, it creates such instability in our system, in our lives. It's just not sustainable. And case in point, I mean, where we are today, all the politics doesn't seem to work anymore. Our financial models are definitely not working in this, in this current moment. The way that we, our distribution changed, the way that we've created a global network based on old protocols, old ways of thinking, we're starting to realize it's just not stable. It's not sustainable in every aspect. Politically, in regards to healthcare, economically, socially, and it's time that we need to have very candid conversations to be able to not just talk about the state of today, but what's tomorrow going to look like. Let's start really looking at fundamentally, what does a new vision of a future look like that's good for everybody, a very socially inclusive ecosystem.
Well, and you know what I think the irony of this is here we are, two very white privileged people discussing this, right? Yeah. And I mean, that's a great thing. It's wonderful, and it's great that you and I have this consciousness and we want to shift and change things. But we are like we're on the white privilege side. Absolutely. And I said on Sunday, it's more than we have to shift in our consciousness so that we take action and do something, because it's really, and it's not just us as white people doing something, it's everyone in collaboration doing something. Because again, if it's just one group taking action, I mean, yes, that can help shift the consciousness, but if we're still exclusive, then we're still just doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it very interesting that growing up in Canada, and maybe I was sheltered, but the degree of divide in the in the social consciousness, I never realized it was ongoing. Up until about 7 or 8 years ago, that's when I was doing some traveling in the States, and I started to realize that the degree of disparity and the tensions were not only still evident, and still present, but it was palpable. And that was a really an awakening moment for me, because in Canada, I just never felt that degree of tension, of racial tension, as I did when I was traveling through the States. And I always thought that, that the tensions, had subsided, and that there's so much progress that was made, through different movements in the past, and that we had come out on the other side. And boy, was I wrong, and it wasn't until I became more consciously aware, I started to tune my attention into it, I realized, like, my God, this is something that's still rampant, I mean, not just in the States, but around the world, in different cultures. And it's just very disheartening when I came to that realization and started to see it with my own two eyes. It was disgusting. But you're absolutely right. We definitely need now, people need to come together and find ways to connect.
Well, and that's the next step, right? It's providing that safe, honoring, sacred place for people to be heard. And so, that would be our next step. That would be many people's next step. And the willingness to hear from the heart. And of this exercise, I've used it several times in workshops of people in dyads, in pairs, and one person will talk about an issue in their life and the other person listens. And then we get them into heart coherence. And so they really are connected and integrated emotionally, intellectually, physically, intuitively. And then they have that same conversation. And the way that the person describes their situation when they're in their heart space and in that place of heart coherence is very different. The energy and the tone of it is different. The facts might still be the same. And the way that the person hears it is very different as well, because they're they're much more open. There's compassion. There's a different ability to hold that benevolent space for the person. And so when it's, those are the ways that we need to have conversation, is in that heart coherence, so that it's not just firing off from the high cortical state and just, looping through at the same level of anger, fear, and rage and blame and victimness. But, I'm in my heart, and yeah, I'm feeling this, but I'm able to really express it differently, and it's able to be received differently.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, absolutely. I love that. I mean, in that state of coherence, is in my mind, it's another way of saying that we're shifting our consciousness levels. So if we are able to shift our consciousness to a heightened level in that moment, then everything that we can communicate, everything that we're perceiving is now going to be, perceived and communicated in a much more expansive, a much more heartfelt way. And we're starting to realize that, we always used to think that humans had those five senses, but it turns out we have so many more senses. And the opening of the heart is definitely such a profound a sense that I think will help us communicate and help us connect and reconnect with ourselves and each other.
Yeah.
I agree.
And then certainly using the art as a part of that conversation, right? As to what's possible, what
Absolutely.
is, but also what's possible.
Mm-hmm. I wish if we had an opportunity to all be together, it'd be beautiful to have a workshop and where people can create their own art to, express themselves and their emotions, and to do it with, that heart coherence. I think it would be just such a beautiful thing, and what we would create, and what we bring forth into the universe, I think has resounding effects and, a ripple effect, well beyond just that moment. But what we're cultivating and birthing into the world together, energetically is very powerful and is really real when it comes to a vision for a new future.
Yes. And eventually those workshops will happen.
Can't wait.
Apparently
Can't
not
wait.
in June though.
Yeah. Keeps getting delayed.
Yeah, just a little. But you know what? Again, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can continue to have these conversations and then, create more space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Cohesiveness.
pardon me?
More cohesiveness.
More cohesiveness. Yes. Yes. And, this is where being online is an incredible platform for at least getting the conversation started.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
Grateful to be here every second Tuesday.
I know. Well, yes. And because you'll be back again in 2 weeks. And then on the 23rd as well. You're here 3 times this month, which is fantastic. And we will have some other guests with us as well. So that'll keep the conversation going.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know if there's some questions or comments from anyone.
If we move out of the screen share, then I can have a look. Because I don't, I can go to Facebook Live and let's see what's. Don't see any oh, wait, we have. Oh, okay. Few people saying hello. And a couple of people having difficulty getting onto Zoom. But if anybody has any questions and they want to write it in the comment section, because I know there were a few people, if they could get onto Zoom, they would be asking questions because I know who they are. So if you want to write something up, please feel free to do so. I don't see any coming. No, I don't think so. So we can leave the conversation at that for now, and then we will have continued conversation in a couple of weeks. And who knows what'll happen by then.
Yes, yeah. Where we will be in a couple of weeks.
That is the mystery of life.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Every day it's something new.
It is. Yeah. Well, thank you for this, Mitch, because this is fantastic. And
My pleasure.
I so appreciate your art and what you put into it. Just amazing. Absolutely amazing what you do.
Thank you. I love hearing presentations. It's wonderful. It's great learning for me.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Well, I'll just do another check here. I knew he would have a question. It's from Nick. Mitch, what do you have to say about getting closer to unity with all the apparent division around us?
Well, I think that ironically, the further that we find ourselves in these moments of turmoil and divide, I feel it helps us get closer together in the sense that this is a process, and that as we become more socially conscious, it creates that degree of of people wanting to become more active and acting and going out and protesting the violence. This is, people are getting to a point of desperation, and we're becoming more and more socially conscious of it. And I think that process, even though right now it looks ugly, it's terrible, and there's a lot of hurt and anger, I believe that is part of the process in order for us to get to a point where things will start to come together. And I truly believe that, again, as we become more aware of this disparity, that we will also become conscious of the roadblocks and obstacles that are perpetuating this old paradigm, this old way of thinking. And that realization is half the battle. Just becoming aware is half the battle, and then it's okay. Well, what can we do about it?
Tough question.
Oh, that was my. I don't know if you heard that. It was my Google Home. It's always listening to me.
Did it say tough question?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it did. It's a tough question. It's a good
That's
question.
good. It's a great. Tell her it's a good question. It's a great question.
So I think there's an irony to it. There's what looks, I think we have to get to the darkest point in order for us to also realize where the light is and how to move towards that light. And ultimately, I believe energy is the key. Energy will reframe our perspective of how we understand ourselves as individuals, and as a collective. So I believe that those 2 points will help us move forward.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah. Yes, and the light pushes up the darkness to be transformed. And so it may appear to be very messy and scary right now, And yet that is impermanent. It will shift and change. And as we shift and change in our own consciousness and energy and have these conversations and take the action as well.
Mm-hmm. I almost feel like we as individuals, we need challenges in our life in order for growth. And we are all each on our own individual journeys. We're all somewhere in that journey called life. And, it's our duty to have to figure out and navigate our path. And it's, and pain, unfortunately, is something that comes with growth. And
there's a great saying. It's from Dr. Michael Beckwith. Pain pushes until vision pulls.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yeah.
Cool.
Great. Well, thank you. It's always good to see you. And I will see you not next week, the week after.
Sounds great.
All right.
Lynn, thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye for now.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.